All right, we have two more questions. We have two more questions to answer, 25, 26. Then I want to check this. I won't stop and check it, but I'll do it at the end of the class. So we need to answer 25 and 26. We're on page 105. Yeah, would you? We tore along over. They're on their way. I think the last time we looked, they were 5 miles or 6 miles. What was it? 5 or 6 miles. A mile and a half. They're as close as a mile and a half. They've gotten under attack. I think we read this. Look at number 25. Describe the natives' attack on the steamship. Who was killed in the attack? I think we read that. I can give you an answer. Anybody know?
Which question?
This is question 25. They are under attack. I think we don't know who's. Well, we'll find this out in just a minute. So they're under attack from the natives. They're surrounded, and if not surrounded, they're on two sides by the jungle, and they are attacked with arrows. And they said the arrows were like sticks. You know, they didn't look like they could hurt anybody. But his helmsman is killed. His helmsman is the guy steering the boat, and he is a cannibal. And we'll find out that he waxes eloquent about him. Marlowe says he really liked him. He was really useful and helpful. So, and then we'll get on the next page just to finally, they're practically at Kirk, but they're not quite. So, go ahead, Julian.
We pour slowly along.
Yeah.
We pour slowly along the overhanging bushes in a whirl of broken twigs and flying leaves. The fusillade below stopped short, as I had foreseen it would be in the squirt that empty. I threw my head back to a glinting woods that traversed the pilot house, in at one shutter hole and out the other, looking past that mad helmsman, who was shaking the empty rifle and yelling at the shore. I saw vague forms of men running bent double, leaping, gliding, distinct, incomplete, evanescent. Something big appeared in the air before the shutter. The rifle went overboard, and the man stepped back swiftly, looked at me over his shoulder in an extraordinary, profound, familiar manner, and fell upon my feet. The side of his head hit the wheel twice, and at the end of what appeared a long cane clattered round and knocked over a little camp stool. It looked as though, after wrenching that thing from somebody ashore, he had lost his balance in the effort. Thin smoke had blown away. We were clear of the snag, and looking ahead, I could see that in another 100 yards or so, I would be free to sheer off, away from the bank. But my feet felt so very warm and wet that I had to look down. The man had rolled on his back and stared straight up at me. Both his hands clutched that cane. It was the shaft of the spear that, either thrown or lunged through the opening, had caught him in the side just below the ribs. The blade had gone in and out of sight after making a frightful gash. My shoes were full. A pool of blood lay very still, gleaming dark red under the wheel. His eyes shone with an amazing luster. The fusillade burst out again. He looked at me anxiously, gripping the spear like something precious with an air of being afraid I would try to take it away from him. I had to make an effort to free my eyes from his gaze and attend to the steering. With one hand I felt above my head for the line with the steam whistle, and jerked out screech after screech hurriedly. The tumult of angry and warlike yells was checked instantly, and then from the depths of the woods went out such a tremulous and prolonged wail of mournful fear and utter despair as may be imagined to follow the flight of the last hope from the earth. There was great commotion in the village. The shower of arrows stopped. A few dropping shots rang out sharply. Then silence, in which the languid beat of the stern wheel came plainly to my ears. I put the helm hard starboard at the moment when the pilgrim in pajamas, very hot and agitated, appeared in the doorway. The manager said to me. He began in an official tone and stopped short. Good God, he said, glaring at the wounded man.
All right, so the helmsman, and he'll talk about him for a while. He really liked him because he was good at what he did. He was helpful. The attack, it's a fusillade. So what does that mean?
Oh, just like a barrage.
Yeah, I mean, just hundreds of arrows all at once, and one gets him, so he's killed by one of the arrows. I don't think it asked you this, but it will. Notice what, I don't know if you could tell, but if you read it carefully, you'd notice that the attack actually stops or slows up at least after Marlowe does what?
Screams.
What?
Doesn't he like sound off like something screeching?
Yeah, the whistle, the boat's whistle actually scares him off. He's not sure that's what it is yet, but it is. That's the one that worked. So, Ryan, would you do another one?
We two whites stood over him, his lustrous and inquiring glance enveloped his bow. I declare it looked as though he would presently put us to some question in an understandable language. But he died without uttering a sound, without leaving a limb, without pitching a missile, only in the very last moment, as though in response to some sign he could not see, some which fully could not hear. He frowned heavily, and that frown gave to his black mask an unconceivably somber gray, brooding and menacing expression. The lustre of inquiring glance faded swiftly into vacant glassiness. "Can you steer?" I asked the agent urgently. He looked very dubious, but I made a grab at his arm, and he understood at once. I meant him to steer whether or no. To tell you the truth, I was morbidly anxious to change my shoes and socks. "He is dead," murmured the fellow. "Immensely impressed, no doubt about it," said I, tugging like mad at the shoelaces. "And by the way, I suppose Mr. Kurtz is dead as well by this time."
And although he's in the middle of this battle, he's got his feet and his shoes covered with the blood of the helmsman. He wants to take them off because he doesn't want to have that blood on him. But when this happens, he makes the comment that he supposed Mr. Kurtz is also dead. And then he kind of goes off on Mr. Kurtz, not goes off on him like angry, but he starts thinking about Kurtz. So for the next few paragraphs, we're going to find out the answer to number 26. There's one thing about Kurtz that he's going to miss. He thinks he's dead. He basically convinced himself that he's dead. And there's one thing he's going to miss about it. Never having met him, but one thing he wanted to meet him about. We'll find out what that is.
For the moment, that was the dominant thought. There was a sense of extreme disappointment, as though I had found out I'd been striving after something altogether without a substance. I couldn't have been more disgusted if I had traveled all this way for the sole purpose of talking with Mr. Kurtz. Talking with, I flung one shoe overboard and became aware that was exactly what I had been looking forward to, a talk with Kurtz. I made the strange discovery that I had never imagined him as doing, but as discoursing. I didn't say to myself, "Now I will never see him," or "Now I will never shake him by the hand," but "Now I will never hear him." The man presented himself as a voice. Not, of course, that I did not connect with him in some sort of action. Hadn't I been told in all the terms of jealousy and admiration that he had collected, bartered, swindled, or stolen more ivory than all the other agents together? That was not the point. The point was in his being a gifted creature, and that of all his gifts, the one that stood out preeminently, that carried with it a sense of real presence, was his ability to talk, his words, the gift of expression, the bewildering, the illuminating, the most exalted, and the most contemplable, the pulsating stream of light, or the deceitful flow from the heart of an impenetrable darkness.
So thank you. What is it that he's going to miss about Kurtz?
His ability.
Right. He said he's going to miss seeing him. No, that's not it. He's going to miss. What was the other thing? Whatever it was another. He was going to miss hearing from him, and this raises the question that the voice is a powerful thing. Words are a powerful thing. Believe it or not, it's voices and words that really do the most damage and do the most good. Actions usually come from words. I mean, somewhere there was an idea, there was a word, and then to get other people, there has to be a voice to express it. There's a great movie out called it's about the King of England, and maybe you remember it. The title is escaping me, but it's a true story about Elizabeth, the current queen's father, and it'll come to me in just a minute. But he was not supposed to be king. His brother was supposed to be and became king, and his brother wanted to marry an American commoner, kind of like Harry. Harry married an American commoner. All Americans are commoners. So he married, and as a result, he couldn't be king anymore. And so he abdicated, and Elizabeth's father became king. That's why Elizabeth is queen, because her father was king. It's still, anybody remember the name of the?
No.
Okay, it's coming to me. You know the movie?
No, I just know the story.
Right. To go on with the story, the problem with him being king was he stuttered, and particularly when he tried to make speeches, and you have to have somebody in that role who can speak well and eloquently. And so they hire this guy, they hire this guy, and he teaches them how to speak without stuttering. The reason I'm bringing this up now, because the king, still learning how to speak without stuttering, is watching a movie of Adolf Hitler. And a lot of things you can say about Adolf Hitler, but the thing that probably was his most powerful weapon was his voice, because that's what we always see. We see him walking around, strutting around, but we hear him yelling. He's always angry. He would seem like he was always angry. He was always yelling at the top of his voice, standing up here, looking around. But he had this compelling voice that kind of captivated people. How did Satan tempt Eve? It was by his voice. It was by the words. He fooled her. He tricked her. He lied to her. He spoke to her. He didn't show her how to do it. He told her something. And what is God's method of communicating with words? It's the Word of God. It's not the image of God. So this book talks about the power of the voice. The book of James, the book of Proverbs, talk about it's the most dangerous thing that you and I have. It's the thing that's going to get you and I in trouble. Did you know that every word that we say is going to be held, we're going to be held accountable for it? You say, you got to be kidding. That's not what the Word of God says. Every word that you say, you're going to be held accountable for it. So this book, when it came right down to it, what was the heart of darkness? It came from the heart, of course, but what was the weapon? It was the voice. So he's saying, I wish I could have heard the voice. So you notice from now on, people that know Kurt, they talk about how he spoke, that he could kind of mesmerize people. He could kind of hypnotize people with his voice. You can do a lot of damage with a voice, with your words. Ben, would you do this next one? The other shoe. So he gets off the subject, then he comes back to it. He's still got blood on his shoes, and he threw one in the water, and he regrets that later. But would you read the other shoe?
The other shoe went flying into the devil god of that river. I thought by Job.
Yeah.
It's all over. We were too late. He has vanished. The gift has vanished by means of some spare arrow or club. I will never hear that chap speak after all. And my sorrow had a startling extravagance of emotion, even such as I noticed in the howling sorrow of these savages in the bush. I couldn't have felt more of gloomy desolation. Somehow had I been robbed of a belief or had missed my destiny in life. Why do you sigh in a beastly way, somebody? Sure. Well observed, good Lord. Mustn't a man ever? Here, give me some tobacco.
All right, thanks. Have you noticed that all the complimentary things that have been said about Kurtz, we noted that all the great things, now you're beginning to hear something else. You're beginning to hear things like he collected ivory, he bartered it, he swindled it, he stole it. So now you're beginning to hear other things about Kurtz, who was such a great guy. You know, he wanted just the best for Africa, and he was smart and great and all this.
Africa.
Maybe he's a thief, which apparently he is. Would you mind reading the next one?
The other shoe?
No, the next paragraph.
Oh,
There was
there was a pause of profound stillness, then a match flared and Marlowe's lean face appeared, worn, hollow, with downward folds and dropped eyelids, with an aspect of concentrated attention. And as he took vigorous draws at his pipe, it seemed to retreat and advance out of the night. In the regular flicker of the tiny flame, the match went out.
Now, would you highlight that, just bracket that? That is the frame, you know what I mean by that? That is a reference, we go back to the Thames River with the 5 people on it and Marlowe talking to them. That paragraph is in reference to that. That's where we are. We've never left the Thames River. We've been there all this entire book, listening to Marlowe tell this story. So every now and then, the narrator will take us back to the Thames and then take us back to the Congo, which is the other river that he's on. Would you mind reading the next one?
Absurd, he cried. This is the worst of trying to tell. Here you all are, each mourned with 2 good addresses.
Now pause just a minute. He's talking to those 4 guys sitting around him on the Thames. He's saying, you're not gonna understand what I'm talking about because you guys live in a different world than what we were living in Africa. Keep going.
Like a hulk with 2 anchors, a butcher around one corner, a policeman round another. Excellent appetites and temperature normal. You hear normal from year to year's end. And you say, absurd, absurd, he exploded, absurd. My dear boy, what can you expect from a man who, out of sheer nervousness, has just flung overboard a pair of new shoes? Now I think of it, it is amazing I did not shed tears. I am upon the whole proud of my fortitude. I was cut to the quick at the idea of having lost the inestimable privilege of listening to the gifted Kurtz. Of course, I was wrong. The privilege was waiting for me. Oh yes, I heard more than enough. And I was right too. A voice, he was very little more than a voice. I heard him, this voice, other voices, all of them were so little more than voices. The memory of this time itself lingered around me, implausible like a dying vibration of one immersed, jabber, silly, atrocious, sordid, savage, or simply me. Without any kind of sense, voices, even the girl herself now. He was silent for a long time.
Okay, underline, circle the word girl. There are 2 girls, actually there's several women. There's the aunt, there's the 2 women in the office in Belgium who are knitting like the Fates. But there are 2 girls here that are related to Kurt. One is his African girlfriend, and one is his European girlfriend. The European girlfriend's still in Europe, and the African girlfriend is right here. She's more than a girlfriend. They call her the intended. In other words, he's engaged to be married to these 2 girls. And so they represent Europe and Africa, the 2 places that Kurtz is part of both. He's part of Europe and he's part of Africa. So he starts to talk about the girl, Hartley.
He was silent for a long time. I laid the ghost of his gifts at last goodbye, he began suddenly. Girl, what? Did I mention a girl? Oh, she is out of it completely. They, the woman I mean, are out of it. Should be out of it. We must help them stay in the beautiful world of their own, lest our gets worst. Oh, she had to be out of it. You should have heard this dysentery body of Mr. Kurt saying my intent.
That's what he calls, if you want to highlight that, if any reference to my intended means my, what do you call her, fiance. But he's got 2 of them, so it's hard to tell which one he's talking about sometimes.
You would have perceived directly then how completely she was out of it. And then the lofty frontal bone of Mr. Kurtz. They say the hair goes on growing sometimes, but this specimen was impressively bald. The wilderness had
Or wilderness.
The wilderness had pat him on the head, and behold, it was like a ball, an ivory ball. It had caressed him, and lo, he had withered it, had taken him, loved him, embraced him, brought into his veins, consumed his flesh, and sealed his soul to its own blood and conceivable ceremonies of some devilish initiation.
You can keep reading or pass it. I didn't know if you were stopping.
Jeffrey.
Hi, Jeff. He was spoiled.
Was it spoiled and pampered favorite? Ivory, I should think so. Heaps of it, stacks of it. The old mud shanty was bursting with it. You would think there was not a single tusk left either above or below the ground in the whole country. Mostly fossil, the manager had remarked disparagingly. It was no more fossil than I am. They call it fossil when it's dug up. It appears these slaves do bury the tusk sometimes, but evidently they couldn't bury this parcel deep enough to save the gifted Mr. Kirk from his fate. We filled the steamboat with it and had to pile a lot on the deck. Thus he could see and enjoy as long as he could see, because the appreciation of his favor had remained with him to the last. You should have heard him say, "My ivory." Oh yes, I heard him. My intended, my ivory, my station, my river, my everything belongs to him. It made me hold my breath in expectation of hearing the wilderness burst into a prodigious peal of laughter that would shake the fixed stars in their places. Everything belonged to him, but that was a trifle. The thing was to know what he belonged to, how many powers of darkness claimed him for their own. That was the reflection that made you creepy all over. It was impossible. It was not good for one either. Trying to imagine. They had taken a high seat amongst the devils in the land. I mean, literally. You can't understand. How could you? The solid pavement under your feet, surrounded by kind neighbors ready to cheer you or to fall on you, stepping delicately between the butcher and the policeman, and the holy terror of scandal and gallows and lunatic asylums. How can you imagine what particular region of the first ages a man untrammeled feet may take him into by the way of solitude? Utter solitude without a policeman, by the way of silence, utter silence, where no warning voice of the kind neighbor to be heard whispering a public opinion. These little things make all the great difference. When they are gone, you must fall back on your own innate strength, on your own capacity for faithfulness. Of course, you may be too much of a fool to go wrong, too dull even to know you are being assaulted by the powers of darkness. I take it, no fool ever made a bargain for a soul with the devil. The fool is too much of a fool, or the devil too much of the devil. I don't know which. Or you may be such a thunderingly exalted creature as to be altogether deaf and blind for anything but heavenly sights and sound. Then the earth for you is only a standing place, and whether to be like this is your loss or your gain, I won't pretend to say.
Right, but most of us are neither one nor the other. The earth is a place to live in, where we must put up with sights and sounds, with smells too, by Jove, breathe dead hippo as you speak, so to speak, and not be contaminated. And there, don't you see, your strength comes in the faith of your ability for the digging of unostentatious holes to bury the stuff in. Your power of devotion, not to yourself, but to an obscure, backbreaking business. That's difficult enough, mine. And I am not trying to excuse or even explain. I'm trying to account to myself for Mr. Kurtz. Again, anytime you see Kurtz, make a note of it, mark it. All you have to do is underline it, highlight it. I got a highlighter. For the shade of Mr. Kurtz, the initiated wraith from the back of nowhere honored me with its amazing confidence before it vanished altogether. This was because it could speak English to me. The original Kurtz had been partly educated in England, and as was good enough to say himself, his sympathies were in the right place. His mother was half English, his father half French. All Europe contributed to the making of Mr. Kurtz. And by I learned that most appropriately the International Society for the Suppression of Savage Customs had entrusted him with making a report for its future guidance. Underline that fancy title, the International Society for the Suppression of Savage Customs. You remember the white man's burden? Remember the cause that he kept talking about of civilizing countries, continents like Africa? And remember, this is what Kurtz intended to do when he went to Africa. He believed he could civilize them. And he was asked by these people to provide a report. Listen to this story. They had entrusted him to making a report for its future guidance. For he had written it too. I've seen it, I've read it. It was eloquent, vibrating, and excellent. Eloquent, but too high-strung, I think. 17 pages of close writing he had found time for. But this must have been before his, let's say, nerves went wrong and caused him to preside at certain midnight dances ending with unspeakable rites. Circle those. Midnight dances, unspeakable rites. as far as I reluctantly gathered from what I heard at various times, were offered up to him, do you understand? To Mr. Kurtz himself. It was a beautiful piece of writing. What is he saying about Mr. Kurtz?
Sort of gone a little bit crazy.
Yes, and what's going on around him? It says that he presided at midnight dances with some certain unspeakable rites which were offered up to him. Who do you offer a rite or a sacrifice to? God. A God, or God, the only God. So they were treating him like a God. He's now determined that he's being treated, or he was being treated like a God, to Mr. Kurtz himself. But it was a beautiful piece of writing. The opening paragraphs, however, in the light of later information, strikes me now as ominous. He began with the argument that we whites, from the point of development, had arrived at most necessarily, appears to them, savages in the nature of the supernatural being. We approach them with the might as of a deity. So he admits in this article that these uncivilized people see white people as gods. You remember, Peace Child? That was how they were often treated. Not the Richardsons so much, but anytime they saw the first white men they saw before they realized they weren't gods, they treated them like gods. And so they did that to Kurtz. By the simple exercise of our will, we can exert a power for good, practically unbounded. If someone saw you as a god, in other words, they would do anything for you, they're completely subservient to you. If you were well-intentioned, you could do any good that you wanted, if your heart was good. But the name of the book is Heart of Darkness. Nobody's heart is good. And so he goes on to say, from that point he soared and took me with him. The peroration was magnificent, though difficult to remember. You know, it gave me the notion of an exotic immensity ruled by an august benevolence. It made me tingle with enthusiasm. This was the unbounded power of eloquence, of words, of burning noble words. I'm going to underline that. Again, he says, what really was it that caused people to admire Kurtz, even worship him, was his words, his power of speech. Again, with a bad person, Adolf Hitler. With a good person, maybe Winston Churchill, Abraham Lincoln. You know, they had great words. But, you know, the guy with the bad ideas, Hitler, did a lot of damage. There were no practical hints to interrupt the magic current of phrases, unless a kind of note at the foot of the last page, scrawled evidently much later in an unsteady hand, may be regarded as the exposition of a method. It was very simple, and at the end of that moving appeal to every altruistic sentiment, it blazed at you, luminous and terrifying. It, like a flash of lightning in a serene sky. Exterminate all the brutes. Let's go to question 31. We've answered those others. I just didn't point them out. We can go back and look at them. 31. What is ironic about Kurtz's last scribbled words on his report for the Society for the Suppression of Savage Customs? What were his last words? He wrote this report talking about the power of Europe to change and help Africa, and it was all soaring and eloquent and wonderful. And then he scribbled this last sentence. I can imagine the rest of the report was typed, you know, a manual typewriter or something. What were the last words?
Exterminate all the brutes.
So instead of civilizing them, his last conclusion was, let's exterminate the brutes. If that doesn't recall to mind, and this was written before people like Adolf Hitler came to power, that was exactly they called it the final solution. The solution to Jews in Europe was exterminate them. The curious part was that he had apparently forgotten all about the valuable postscriptum, because later on, when in a sense he came to himself, he repeatedly entreated me to take care of my pamphlet, as he called it. as it was clear to have in the future a good influence upon his career. I had full information about all those things, and besides, as it turned out, I was to have the care of his memory. I've done enough for it to give me the indisputable right to lay it, if I choose, for an everlasting rest in the dustbin of progress. Amongst all the sweepings and figurative speaking, all the dead cats of civilization. Would you start at the very top where I left off,
Yeah.
but then you see?
But then you see, I can't choose. He won't be forgotten. Whatever he was not common. He had the power to charm or frighten rudimentary souls into aggravated witch dance in his honor. He could also fill the small souls of the pilgrims with bitter misgivings. He had one devoted friend at least. He had conquered one soul in the world that was neither rudimentary nor tainted with self-seeking. No, I can't forget, though I am not prepared to affirm the fellow was exactly worth the life we lost in getting to him. I miss my late helmsman awfully.
Circle the helmsman. I'll ask you about him. Why is he so important to Kurtz? He'll tell you right here.
I missed my late husband awfully. I missed him even while his body was still lying in the pilot house. Perhaps you will think it passing strange that this regret for a savage who was no more account than a grain of sand in a black sea. Well, don't you see? He had done something. He had steered for once. I had him at my back to help and instrument. It was a kind of partnership.
So what does he admire about this helmsman? What did he just say? He had done something. He had steered for months, a help, an instrument. It was a kind of partnership. He admires people who get things done, who accomplish things, don't you? I mean, don't you like whatever organization you're in or group you're in, don't you like the people, you can count on them. They actually contribute. They do things. They create things. They help things. That's why he's saying, we lost this guy. You'd rather have the helmsman than Kurtz. Because Kurtz, you're going to find out more and more, didn't really do much of anything positive. I did for the company, but Ivory, what's the use of Ivory? Anyway, keep reading.
He steered for me. I had to look after him. I worried about his deficiencies, and thus a subtle bond had been created, of which I only became aware when it was suddenly broken. In the intimate profundity of that look he gave me when he received his final remains, which to this day in memory, like a claim of distant kinship, affirmed and disapproved of it.
Thanks. Yes.
Poor fool, if he had only left that char alone. He had no restraint, just like Kurtz, the tree swayed by the wind. As soon as I had put on a dry pair of slippers, I dragged him out. At the first jerk of the spear out of his side, which operation I confess performed with my eyes shut tight. His heels leaped together over the little doorstep, his shoulders were pressed to my breast. I hugged him from behind desperately. Oh, he was heavy, heavier than any man on earth, I should imagine. Then, without more ado, I tipped him overboard. The current snatched him as though he had been a wisp of grass. I saw his body roll over twice before I lost sight of it forever.
Okay, why does he do that with him? The guy he likes so much, he throws his body in the water.
It's like a burial at sea kind of thing.
Well, yeah, and that's why they bury people at sea. They can't keep them on those ships. In the old days, you couldn't keep them on there for long. Yeah.
That was like cannibals don't eat his body.
Exactly. He's going to say that in a minute. One is there's really no alternative, but two, he didn't want the guy to be eaten. I keep going.
Oh, sorry. All the pilgrims and the manager were then congregated on the awning deck about the pilot house, chattering each other like a flock of excited magpies. And there was a scandalized murmur at my heartless promptitude. What they wanted to keep the body hanging about for, I can't guess. Embalmment maybe, but I also heard another very ominous murmur on the deck below. My friends the woodcutters were likewise scandalized, and with a bitter show of reason, though I admit the reason itself was quite inadmissible. Oh, quite. I had made up my mind that if my late helmsman was to be eaten, the vicious alone should have him. And he had been a very second-rate helmsman while alive, but now he was dead, he might have become a first-class temptation, possibly cause some startling trouble. Besides, I was anxious to take the wheel. The man in pink pajamas showing himself a hopeless duffer at business.
Thanks, Tucker.
Yes, I did directly the simple we were going half speed, keeping right in the middle of the street. Now listen to the talk about it. They had given up Kurtz, they had given up the station. Kurtz was dead, the station had burned. And so on and so on. The red-haired pilgrim was beside himself and thought that at least this poor Kurtz had been properly avenged. Say, we must have made a glorious slaughter of them in the bush. Hey, what do you say? He probably thinks the bloodthirsty little gingery beggar. He had nearly fainted when he saw the woman. I could not help saying, you made a glorious lot of smoke in the air. I had seen from the way the tops of bushes rustled and flew, that most all the shots had gone too high. You can hit anything unless you take aim and fire from the shoulder, but these chaps fired from the hip with their eyes shut. Their retreat was contained. And I was right. It was caused by the screeching of the string of the seamless. Upon this, they forgot Kurtz and began to howl at me with indignant protest.
The manager stood by the wheel murmuring confidently about the necessity of getting well away down the river before dark at all events. When I saw in the distance a clearing on the riverside and the outlines of some sort of building. What's this? I asked. He clapped his hand in wonder. The station, he cried. I edged at once, still going. So they are finally at the interstation. They are at Kurtz. We will meet him in 2 pages. Not really, it's still a few pages off. So we didn't get quite to 115, but we did pretty well. We can finish this by Monday, and our test will be Friday of next week, yeah. Yeah, I will check this tomorrow, because we're not finished, we'll need to finish, there's 2 sides to that. You may keep them for the exam, because this stuff will be on the exam. Hey, boy, bring it back. I always hand that to you. Julian, here's your Alex, sir.
Yes.
Go ahead, yeah, we'll see. And plus you'll have
I can show you that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have,
Hang on, let me try.